Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Budapest. Welcome to this event called The Business of European Football, Value, Growth and Sustainability. My name is Pedro Pinto, delighted to be your host here and lead conversations about what happens off the pitch in European football. Of course, on the pitch, we have a fantastic match to look forward to tomorrow evening. We're about 29 hours away from PSG versus Arsenal at the Puskás Arena, the highlight of the European club season. Just a quick show of hands. Who's got PSG? Not that I have PSG, but who actually do? I have PSG. PSG, oh wow, okay. Arsenal? Majority. I'd love to interview some of you and find out what the reasoning is. It's interesting actually, because obviously PSG has done it by scoring goals. They scored 44. Arsenal have done it by not letting goals in. They've got 9 clean sheets. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the football stats. We are here to talk about the business side of football. It's never been as dynamic, as complex, as consequential as it is today. And I think the business of football gains more attention, more traction, more column inches, and more attention from fans as well, who want to know what's happening. And I think if it would be fair to pick something which Andrea Sartori and his team at Football Benchmark have done over the last 10, 11 years, has been really try to break down what happens on the pitch, what leads clubs to have a certain valuation, and how is that valuation reached. And of course, the timing of this event is very important because it's just one day after the latest football club value report has come out. And it's called the European Elite. You know, it's been going on for 11 years, and it really offers insight into how clubs are managing their finances and how they're growing, how they're becoming more sustainable, how they're becoming businesses that can be profitable. So what can you expect here over the next 2.5 hours? We're going to start out by talking about value, and Andrea Sartori is going to come up here and explain to you the meaning behind the numbers that were launched yesterday, which will be incredibly stimulating. He'll also be joined by someone who knows the landscape of European football better than, I would say, any working in it at the moment. I'll introduce you to them in just a moment. Then we're going to talk about growth and learn more about the story of a boutique club in Italy that has managed to qualify for the UEFA Champions League against all odds. That is, of course, Como, 1907. And then we're going to talk about sustainability and delve into the subject of, are we asking too much of the players who are on the pitch? When is enough when it comes to the football calendar, and how can we find some balance there? So let's get right into it. I'm delighted to welcome here on stage our host as well, one of our hosts with Football Benchmark, along with the Social Football Summit here, the CEO and founder of Football Benchmark, Andrea Sartori.
Thank you, Pedro.
Welcome. Please take one of the seats. And joining him is another Andrea Traverso, who most, if not all of you, will know as the UEFA Executive Director of Financial Sustainability. Welcome. Fantastic. You sit there next to Andrea. We like the two Andreas together, please. Let's see if I get you guys right. Andrea, it's a big moment of the year for you, always, when you release the new valuation report. To kind of kick off the conversation, we'd love it if you would take us through the top lines and explain again why this is so relevant, and also give us some insight into the growth that we've seen in the European football landscape over the last decade or so.
Yes, I'm going to start with the growth. I would say that if we look at the past 10 years, the most astonishing outcome, and in a way show also the resilience of the football industry during COVID time, is that there has been only one stock market in the world, if we are talking about the large stock market, that have performed better than elite football, which is the Nasdaq. If you take the S&P 500, it performed more or less at the same pace as the top 32 club. And the top 32 clubs, they've been doing better than the Euro Stock 50, which basically include the 50 top blue chips European companies. So I think this demonstrates how football has grown over the last decade, because this is the 11th edition of our report. And then I think there is another top line result. I wasn't surprised to see Real Madrid being, again this year, the most valuable club, but I was surprised to see the gap that there is between the first and the second, which is Barcelona. So you need to buy Barcelona and AC Milan to basically have the value of Real Madrid. It means 12 Champions League together.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of the conversations I had here with some of the familiar faces that we see in these events, the question was, how do you get to these numbers? How do you get to this enterprise value? And you're going to get to explain that to us now as well, as you go through some of the slides.
I was hoping to have a mic, and I have too many things in my hand.
Maybe Andrea can maybe go through the slides? No?
All right. No, thank you, Andrea. So, yeah. So let me just give you a little bit of background on how do we arrive. I feel a little bit strange with you. I mean, we are friends, but this is a bit too much. So let me show you how we get to the overall number. And first of all, let me explain what is enterprise value in very simple terms. So enterprise value is the value of the equity plus debt minus cash and cash equivalent. If you want to take in a very simple way, and I know some people would say, well, technically it's not really correct, you take all the market value of the asset on the left side of a balance sheet, you deduct cash, that's basically the equity value. It's not perfectly correct, but more or less that's what it means. Why do we use enterprise value? Because enterprise value, it's independent from the financing structure of a company, in this case, football club. So the proportion of debt and equity can be different, but it still allows comparability of companies. How do we get to the enterprise value? You have to take into account that we are not speaking to all clubs that we are valuing. We don't have the possibility to talk to the management of all clubs. So we developed, since the time we were at KPMG, an algorithm where we look at the multiple of revenue, looking at past transaction, and then we develop an ad hoc multiple for every single club that we are valuing. And how do we establish that ad hoc multiple? We look at the profitability of club, because of course revenue do not consider how you can have the same level of revenue, but you can have different level of profitability. So profitability is taken into account. Then we look at three asset aspects, which is the popularity, the brand value of a club. We look at the sporting potential, which is expressed to the value of the squad, which is an asset that doesn't always appear in the balance sheet, because in the balance sheet it appears at net book value, it doesn't appear at market value. Whether or not a club owns a stadium, and then we look at the specific market aspect, which is basically the size of the domestic broadcasting rights, which is a fundamental aspect. You can't compare a French club with a club in the Premier League or in La Liga. So that's basically the way, how do we get to determine the enterprise value. Which club do we consider? Basically, we consider only clubs that are part of the top 50 by revenue or top 50 by UEFA coefficient. However, you can still be part of it in case you are in the top 30 by social media number. Why do we use this criteria? Because basically these are clubs that very rarely they are subject to relegation. So they are, let's say, the big European club. Over the years we have seen 3 clubs part of our ranking that were relegated. Schalke, Leicester, and this year West Ham. Is the only time, so over 360 more than 360 times we value club, that basically 1% of those clubs were relegated. So that's the reason why we do have this criteria. Of course, we also need to have the financial statement of a club available, because if they are not publishing audited financial statement, it is the case, for example, for Leipzig, we are not able, of course, to value that club. So that's the reason behind it.
Yeah, and as you look here at the geographical distribution of clubs at the moment, and I wanted to bring Andrea Traverso into this conversation.
Because I was getting tired.
I'm sure you're getting tired, but now you have to hold it for yourself. So use the other hand. I wanted to ask you, Andrea, obviously you follow the trends very closely, and UEFA has a lot of people who are monitoring the financial sustainability of clubs, the accounts. I wanted to ask you about the trends that you've seen over the last 10 years as this document and as this valuation report has been coming out. And it'd be fair to say that nowadays we see more private equity, more private funds, more institutional investors come into football. Does it mean that the landscape is more credible, it's more stable, even with this exception of relegation that can obviously happen to anyone? But how have you seen the financial health and stability of the industry grow?
But for sure, I think, I mean, since I've been working on this topic for 20 years, I have to believe into it, otherwise it would be difficult. But I think that having implemented at UEFA level, first the club licensing and then the financial fair play mechanism, it provided a great credibility, to the industry, because it instilled, it incentivized for more professionalism within football clubs. It gave investors a much more credible environment and stable environment where to come and invest. And this, I think, is one of the strengths nowadays of European football, and provides investors a very sound platform where to invest in. Then there are plenty of obviously there are other factors on top. We cannot say that this is the factor. There are plenty of other things. The fact that in any case, football has grown when it comes in popularity. It is seen as a very, very strong asset. Sport in general is seen as a very strong asset, but football in particular, it is seen by many investors as still being an undervalued asset in which to invest, because as Andrea was mentioning before, valuations of the franchises of the clubs are growing at a very fast pace. And obviously this attracts for investors a lot of opportunities. So the growth that he is portraying in his excellent report, by the way, and I would like to congratulate you, Andrea, for a very nice report that has become a regular appointment now before the Champions League on a yearly basis. It follows a little bit what we have been observing at UEFA over the last, over the last 15 years. If we look at more. We are not doing the same exercise that Andrea is doing in terms of enterprise value, but there is a very strong correlation with the revenues, that the turnover, which is reported by the football clubs. And this has been growing at about almost 10% a year. So we have now, if I'm not mistaken, I'm speaking under the supervision of my colleague, Sefton Perry, who is at the head of the whole intelligence at UEFA. We have now reached at European level the 30 billion mark of revenues. And in 2026 it will be even higher than that. So if we think where we were just 20 years ago, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy. And Andrea, maybe you want to expand a little bit on this slide and talk about how big the growth has been.
Well, the growth has been 176%, so almost tripling the value of the very first year, being 26 billion and now above 72 billion. And you can see that there were 2 years in which the valuation of the club went down because of COVID. I believe, Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, during those 2 years, approximately 7 billion euro of revenue were lost.
Is
right?
correct. Is correct.
So despite those 2 years that have, of course, affected every single industry in global economy, the growth has been impressive. And as I said earlier, if you look at any very major stock market, only the Nasdaq has been doing better, which is absolutely impressive. But I've missed maybe a little bit some comments on this aspect, which is the geographical distribution of value. So first of all, we need to say that over the years, the value of clubs in the Premier League has been growing significantly, not so much this year, but in past year. And the reality is that the Premier League would have more clubs than we have in our report. We only have 9, but because we have the selection criteria that I stated earlier. So the 50 top by revenue and by UEFA coefficient, because Everton is for sure part of this ranking if we wouldn't have that filtering criteria. And even with these statistics, with this filtering criteria, the Premier League has a value that is approximately 42% of the market. You look also at Spain with 4 clubs, which are, of course, the 2 big ones, Barcelona, Real Madrid, plus Atletico, and Real Sociedad this year. The average value is 4 billion. So it's a very, very relevant market. And sadly, being both of us Italian, Italy, with 7 clubs, it basically has a value that is $500 million less than the 3 German clubs that are represented. And the other point that I would like to underline is that this year, only in the first edition, we had 6 clubs that were outside of the Big 5. For the first time, we are back to having 6 clubs, and I do actually think that this is very much due to the growth of UEFA revenue distribution over the years, particularly from the Champions League, but also from the Europa League, to lesser extent to the Conference League.
Andrea, as you continue to take us through this presentation, I also wanted to talk about the 2 finalists from tomorrow, which I'm sure you'll reference, which are Paris Saint-Germain and Arsenal, because they've been rising up the rankings as well, and Arsenal make it to the top 5.
Yeah, I think in the second part of this presentation, we will specifically address those 2 clubs, but maybe it's better to go through the overall top 10, the growth, and also the other clubs that are part of this year ranking. But I think on this one, I would like Andrea to comment, because what is very, very interesting, why, first of all, the value of club has grown so much and why they have performing so well. Of course, there is an issue of revenue growth, all category of revenue, but with UEFA distribution revenue and commercial revenue growing much faster. Profitability has improved over time, and the other aspect is the multiple of revenue have increased. So these were the multiple of revenue in the first year. So where top 10 they had a multiple of 4. By the year 2026, that multiple is grown almost to 6. So it means that to buy a club, the average multiple in the top 10 is 6 times the value of their revenue. And I think that a lot of this has got to do with the stability that it has brought in by the financial sustainability regulation. I think it played a very, very major role, in my opinion.
For sure it played a role. Whether it is the only factor, this remains to be, obviously remains to be seen. Certainly is that what this chart shows is that when it comes to the very top, so when we are in the top 10 clubs, there is an increasing concentration and polarization towards this top end. And this is mainly because these are global clubs and they have a much bigger reach And as you said, and you point out also in your report, as it was pointed out also in our report, commercial revenues have become the main source of income for those clubs. So those clubs can count for more than 500 million in commercial revenues every year. So, and this creates, and this is individual money. This is not shared with the others. It's not like broadcasting, which is shared within each league according to their redistribution models and mechanisms. And this is individual money. They keep it for themselves. So, and this gives them, obviously, the possibility to distance the others. As you rightly said in your report, you mentioned about the difference between Real and the others, but I would say also the difference between the first 8 and the others. There is a big drop after number 8 to number 9, 10, and then below. So, and this is what basically every single indicator is pointing to, is an increased and accelerated polarizations towards the top end, especially after the COVID.
No, there is no doubt that, of course, the top 10, you can, and I would say maybe even a little bit more, top 12, 13 clubs, they are trophy assets. It is very, very difficult to buy that type of club. So there is an issue of scarcity. And therefore, there is often a tendency to pay a premium for those type of clubs. But moving into the top 10 and looking at this ranking, I've already mentioned with the first club, the major gap with the second one being Barcelona. I would also point out that with the exception of Arsenal, this year we haven't seen much growth in the Premier League. There was a very, very significant growth in past year, but they seem in a way to have reached a sort of a ceiling. We see this also with the domestic TV revenue since a while. The other interesting, I would say, finding of this year, for the very first time ever, Manchester United is outside of the podium. In the very first year, Real Madrid and Manchester United, they were valued 2.9 billion. So it is, I would say, quite impressive, the fact that in our very first edition, there was not one club that was above the 3 billion threshold, and now every single club is above the 3 billion threshold, and there are 4/5 clubs, if you consider Arsenal, that are at 5 or more, or a value that is 5 or more billion, which is, I think, absolutely an amazing growth. But as Andrea was also saying, the gap is very, very significant from when you look at the top 8 and then you move down to 9th and 10th and even further down, as you will see later on. If we look at the top 10 growth, and this is a year-on-year growth, is not only the fact that Real Madrid has reached 7.7 billion and Barcelona, it's around 6 billion. It's also very interesting to see the amount of EV that they were able to add in one single year. We are basically speaking about 1.5 billion in terms of revenue, of enterprise,
right,
enterprise value, which is absolutely an amazing number. Again, I would say also the very good performance of the two finalists of tomorrow afternoon, so Arsenal and PSG. And this is for different reasons, because Real Madrid has been growing thanks to the growth of stadium revenue of the Bernabeu, good cost control, because out of the top 32, Real Madrid is the club with the best staff cost to revenue ratio, 44%, followed by Tottenham with 45%. And these are numbers, Andrea, that I think a few years ago were unthinkable.
Yeah, for sure, the new rules that we have implemented have put much increase the discipline among clubs. Now, when we look at these top clubs, they generate also so much revenues. They don't even need to spend all that money on the players. It's more about the competitors, those that are following in the ranking, that are trying to overspend in order to catch up the competitive gap that exists between them and those clubs that are at the top and are generating much more. But having said that, most of the clubs that are at the top, they are really very well run businesses. So they are very, very professional. And this is the big change compared to what we could see 20 years ago, is the increased professionalism, increased sophistications, the fact that they have transformed from being clubs into real enterprises. You use the term enterprise value, and they're huge enterprises, because 7 billion evaluation is definitely quite significant.
Although on this point that you are making, 7.7 billion, and we are talking the number, one of the most prominent franchise in the world. If you put in the context of overall market value, I think in Europe there are possibly a few hundred companies that are valued more than 7.7 billion. So when we are saying it's huge in a football context. In an economic context, it's still very, very small. But what these clubs are capable of moving, the impact that they have on community, on society, if you think the engagement they have in social media, it's uncomparable to any other company. And that's somehow the power of this club, but it's still not expressed through enterprise value. There is one thing I wanted to ask Andrea, jumping back on the top 10. All the big five are represented in this ranking, with PSG being the only French club. Sadly, we don't have an Italian club that is represented here. And if we look at the past 11 editions, only all these 10 clubs were always in the top 10, plus 6 times Juventus was in and out. What is your opinion about Italian football? Why it cannot reach the top of the market?
Well, first, I'm not too surprised to not see any Italian club in your ranking. It follows exactly what I said before. We have the same when we look at the clubs in terms of revenues. There is no Italian clubs within the top 10 clubs by revenues. The reasons, I think, are very well known. Is the fact that the Italian market has not been capable to evolve over the last 15 years. So there are issues. There are issues when it comes to the development of players. We see it. Many clubs are playing with basically 10 or 11, 9, 10, 11 foreigners. Very few Italian players. Lacking infrastructure. This is under the eyes of everyone. So hopefully this is something that where we will be able to catch up soon, because without infrastructure, modern infrastructure, they will not be able to keep the pace with the other clubs around the globe, around Europe, that are investing massively, and this allows you to increase revenues from match day revenues, because if you have 10,000 places more in hospitality, this is a lot of money on a weekly basis, and with commercial revenues, as I said before, that is becoming the component and the biggest source of revenues for the big clubs.
And we will see that soon. But what I'm showing here to the audience is the evolution of the revenue over the past 10 years for the top club, which in aggregate form, it has grown by 83%. And yes, of course there is a correlation between revenue and enterprise value, but the order is not is not the same, and the change depending on which metrics out of the 5 parameters that we are using, you look at. Because whether you look at profitability, whether you look at asset value of the squad and the various other aspects that we are considering, they are not perfectly aligned. But while revenue has been growing by 83%, I'm going to show the next slide, the enterprise value of those clubs has grown by 168%. And to elaborate on what Andrea was just saying about the professionalism of European club, how this has grown, especially in continental Europe in the past 10 years. I think the UK has always been ahead of the curve. What we did here, we took the top 10 club and we took the season 08-09. And we look at the revenue mix at the time. Why did we choose 08-09? Basically, it was before social media, before the OTP platform, well before the OTP platform, and before financial fair play. So this is the reason why this year was selected. And if you look at the structure of revenue, 41% was coming from broadcasting, which is domestic and UEFA revenue, 27% by match day, and 32% by commercial. By now, so according to the latest financial statement available, because an important thing I did not say, we are not considering in our valuation the current sporting season. We look at the financial statements available from the last 2 seasons. 49% of the revenue are coming from commercial revenue. And this is possible only if you have in place a good commercial structure management capable of achieving those type of revenue. Otherwise, it would be impossible.
One data that we have collected and is somehow proving and confirming this trend is the fact that if on one side the salaries of the players, if compared to the revenues, have grown at a lower speed, the salaries of non-players, so of the administrative staff, have grown a lot within the clubs. And also the number of people employed by the club has grown a lot, showing that the clubs are really investing in commercial strategies and activities.
Andrea, there is one specific question I wanted to ask. In the UEFA Financial Sustainability Regulation, the equity and balance sheet strength, it has become an important metrics that you monitor in order to ensure the stability of club. And I think this slide demonstrates that over time, the equity position of the top 10 club, it has improved quite significantly. By the way, we are also showing here the squad value evolution of those top 10 clubs. But what about the equity position of club outside of the top 10? What is happening? Why this matrix was introduced?
Because it is fundamental in order to improve the stability, of the individual clubs, but of the system as a whole, in order to avoid as well trickle-down effects in case clubs go bankrupt. When we initially introduced the rules, and I'm talking about the 209, I think at the time the overall equity reported by all football clubs was less than 2 billion. Okay. Today, it is 13 billion, 13 billion. And this despite a COVID in the middle. But it is very much about the fact that the clubs had a strong balance sheet, that they could survive during COVID, because they were in a position to absorb the loss of revenues that was generated by the crisis. Without that, we would have seen many more clubs in difficulties. When we introduced the rules in 2009, if I remember well, but we were noticing number of bankruptcies. I think the first year was 35 overall Europe, second year 25. Nowadays, it is less than 10. So meaning that, there have been quite a lot of improvement. So this is why we are so keen we have been so keen in reinforcing, even after COVID, the requirement around equity in order for the clubs to reestablish the same level that they just had before the pandemic, because most of it had been eroded during the pandemic, and now they are reestablishing it.
I see.
So this is at every level. So it's not just the obviously the top 10 clubs that you are referring to, but this most stringent rule, they apply to all the 237 clubs that compete in European football. And since they are not always the same, so the number of clubs that we are referring to is a much higher number year after year.
Mm-hmm. If we continue with the ranking, let's look a little bit beyond the top 10. So here, what we can see that if we take a club from the 11th position until the 16th position, we found the three big Italian club. So with Juventus being 14th, overtaking AC Milan. Last year, AC Milan was the most valuable club. And Inter has grown significantly in the past 3 years, both in absolute and in relative terms, and they're now a club value more than 2 billion. But still, as also Andrea said at the beginning, if you look at the distance, or the gap rather than the distance, between Inter and Chelsea, that is in 10th position, there are 900 million. And even between Chelsea and PSG, which is in 8th position, there is a huge gap.
Yeah, but in that, I think you have to take also into account the fact that they don't have a stadium that belongs to them.
True.
While the other clubs, they all have their property stadium. If you would add a property stadium to Inter, the valuation would obviously be...
Absolutely. Yeah, and for AC Milan. And it's also, Juve was, as I say, 6-time part over the 11th edition. The last time in 2022. And in fact, is the only club amongst those big ones owning a stadium. I notice also the fact that Newcastle, for the first time, is part of our valuation because they are meeting the selection criteria, not because their value wasn't sufficiently high before. It's a little bit what I said about Everton. And if we look what happened, later on we put a picture of Porto just because you are Portuguese and we also have some friends from Porto here. So that's why we selected this picture. And we look outside of the big five. As I said earlier, there are 6 clubs sitting on the right side of the ranking that are part of this ranking. Again, 3 Dutch, 2 Portuguese, Benfica and Porto, and Galatasaray. And the very first one, non-big five, that is listed here, is Benfica. So Benfica is the first non-big five club being part of this ranking. But what I would like to underline that on this right side of the ranking, there is significantly more mobility. And there is one very simple reason that explains that, whether or not you are participating to the Champions League. Because that is changing everything. For a club like Porto not having been able to participate to the Champions League because we consider the last 2 financial statements available, of course it does have an impact like it has it for Napoli or Lazio. And that's why they are losing somehow position. So this is basically the reason why this is happening. And this is a slide to showcase the absolute growth when we look at the top 32 clubs. Again, Barcelona and Real Madrid, they are part of this ranking also when you look at the top 32. But then we see PSV, Inter, and Aston Villa. Aston Villa had a very major growth in terms of revenue, improving slowly profitability. And of course, this helps in increasing their value.
Yeah, no doubt about it. As we get to the kind of closing slides here.
Yes.
Andrea. Maybe you can take us through those, and then if we have time, maybe we can open the floor
Yes.
to a couple of questions from the audience.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to ask any prediction to Andrea because I also know he wouldn't answer. But, I mean, regarding the results of the final tomorrow. But I want to ask you, we have been looking at what happened in the past 10 years, how the industry has evolved, how the value, the revenue have been growing over time. But how do you see the next 10 years? What is going to happen? And how... The other thing I wanted to ask is, do you think that financial sustainability regulation with the increasing polarization, did it also have an impact on competitive balance?
We open here a huge,
complex topic.
A very complex topic. But where we are going, I don't have a crystal ball, of course. What I can say is that I see an increasing polarization towards the top. So I'm afraid a little bit that this, a few years ago we were talking about the top 20, then the top 15, then the top 10. Now we are talking about the top 8. I would not be willing to speak about the top 5 in a couple of years from now, or the top 2, They are moving away from all the others, and this kind of gap that is created could, maybe in the future create additional tensions in the system, in the market. For sure, what we have is a pyramidal system in Europe. We need to keep it together. We have 1,500 professional clubs, another 1,600 semi-professional clubs, and this is the strength, of the European football, the fact that we are operating in an open system. Then, when it comes to the rules, no, I don't. I mean, this is the eternal debate whether our rules have cemented the status quo, etc., etc. I reject these kind of theories. Actually, if you look at it, we are not preventing newcomers to get into the system and grow over time. Because, I'll give you some examples. First of all, when we do our controls, we always intervene a posteriori. So we always intervene 1 year later. So at least for 1 year, the investors can overspend and gain even qualification to European competitions. Then, if we found that they are overspending, what usually is happening? That we conclude a settlement agreement. Settlement agreements are basically, we agree on a business plan that is over 3 or 4 years. So we give the clubs time to adapt for another 3 to 4 years. Obviously, they are under monitoring, they are closely followed, but it doesn't mean that they are preventing from investing. So overall, you give clubs time to adapt, and we are talking about a period of 5 to 6 years. So, and we see that we have in your list, we have clubs that in 2009 were not there, but they have grown over time. So it's not cementing the status quo. It's keeping it within a framework, and within a framework that provides the necessary stability and protection to new investors. Because if an investor is coming, he's putting his money into it, he wants to be sure that his investment is somehow protected in a regulated framework. And this is what we are providing. Now, are these rules perfect? Certainly not, and this is what I'm always saying. They are not perfect. These are the rules that we believed were the best in a specific moment and to achieve a specific objective, which is financial sustainability. They don't have as an objective competitiveness or competitive balance. If we would add that objective, then the rules would be completely different, because financial sustainability and competitiveness, they often collide to each other. So you need different rules. Having said that, the rules are not set in stone. They have to continuously be adapted. And one direction that I see could be adapted and where we will definitely be willing to discuss is about creating additional incentives for the club to invest in the youth development and to invest in the infrastructure. Because in the end, with that, the whole system will benefit out of it. And maybe here we have space to create more incentives for the investors.
Pedro, to close before opening up, a few words about the finalists of tomorrow, because I think there are some interesting aspects here. So we look here at the past 4 seasons, the evolution of operating revenue of Arsenal and PSG. You can see that PSG in the last 3 years has been pretty stable. Arsenal had a very, very major growth. But when you look at the composition of their revenue, there are some very, very interesting facts. Of course, Arsenal benefiting from the Premier League revenue distribution is significantly ahead in comparison to PSG. But if you look at the commercial power of PSG is enormous. More than 49% of their revenue is coming from commercial. And when you look also at the broadcasting revenue distribution, you need to take into account that PSG benefit from playing the final of the Champions League that, okay, doesn't create such a major competitive advantage in terms of revenue distribution from UEFA, but they play the World Cup and they arrive in the final. But still, they are behind. But all in all, there is an aspect that maybe is also a message to Arsenal. Arsenal has a stadium that is 30,000 seats smaller than, in comparison to the Parc des Princes in Paris. But if you look at the total revenue that they are realizing, Arsenal is only making 6 million euro more than PSG. And the difference is in pricing. PSG is the club in Europe that is capable of generating the most out of a seat, 146 euro per seat, whether it's occupied or not occupied. It's a little bit like the yield measurement used by airline. By the way, they are always full, so both clubs are always occupied. Arsenal achieve 100 euro. In a market where I don't see any social, economic, demographic reason to justify a 46% difference. So this is an interesting point, and if we want to just have a quick look at different parameters in terms of various metrics, well, operating revenue very, very similar, almost the same. Staff costs are PSG is ahead about 120 million, but PSG has reduced their cost by approximately 200 million in comparison to the season 21-22. Wow. In 21-22, the staff cost to revenue of PSG was 109%, which is massive. Now they are down to 63%, but Arsenal much healthier with the 50%. Profitability of PSG has improved, but is still not at the level of Arsenal, which is, when we look at basically the bottom line, they are basically break-even. And the squad value is very, very similar. Even if we look at what the bookmakers are saying, it would seem that there is a huge difference. In terms of valuation of player, it doesn't seem to be the case, according at least to our valuation algorithm. Most valuable player, on one side, Kvaratskhelia, on the other side, Bukayo Saka.
Andrea, thank you so much for taking us through that presentation. I think a lot of food for thought there throughout. And we just have maybe a couple of minutes for quick questions because we don't want to take too much time from our next session. So are there any quick questions for the Andreas up here before we move on? I know there was a lot of facts and figures there to digest over the last 50 minutes or so. No? Okay, we're going to move on.
Many numbers.
Everything was crystal clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andrea and Andrea. Thank you very much. That closes our first session, which addressed the value of European football.